Windows 1.0. In 1985, Microsoft dropped Windows 1.0. But calling it an operating system is a bit of a stretch. It was more like a fancy coat for MS-DOS. See, back then, using a computer meant staring at a black screen and typing cryptic commands like a hacker in a B-movie just to open a file. It was tedious, and frankly, nobody had time for that. Microsoft's solution was to slap a graphical user interface on top of DOS so people could finally point and click instead of reciting poetry to a command prompt. The apps were charmingly primitive: a calculator, Paint, and a game called Reversi. The catch: you couldn't actually overlap your windows. Everything was locked in tile mode, looking like a digital game of Tetris that you weren't allowed to win. There were no minimize or maximize buttons, and despite having the processing power of a toaster, it loved to crash. It would frequently serve up a blue screen of death accompanied by demonic digital screeching. Also, it required a mouse, which in 1985 was about as common as a pet dinosaur. Anyway, Windows 2.0. Fast forward to 1987, and we get Windows 2.0, the overlapping revolution. For the first time, you could actually place one window on top of another. This was a massive win for office workers who could now multitask, pretending to work on an Excel spreadsheet while hiding a Word document underneath. However, this design choice triggered a legendary tantrum from Apple. They sued Microsoft, claiming the overlapping look was a direct ripoff of the Macintosh. But Microsoft had an ace up their sleeve. They had actually helped Apple build Word and Excel for the Mac. Because they worked so closely together, Microsoft had a legal hall pass to use some of Apple's interface ideas. Apple essentially invited a vampire into their house and then got mad when it started moving the furniture. Microsoft won the case, the judge let the design stay, and the overlapping window became the industry standard we still use today. Windows 3.0 and 3.1. By 1990, Windows 3.0 arrived, and this is where Microsoft finally became the cool kid. This version introduced a full-color interface that didn't look like it was drawn with a dying crayon. It was clean, it was crisp, and more importantly, it was powerful. Thanks to the Intel 386 processor, the absolute beast of the 90s, Windows could finally handle heavy software like CorelDRAW without bursting into flames. 2 years later, Windows 3.1 hit the shelves and introduced the most life-changing feature in tech history: drag and drop. Before this, moving a file felt like performing open-heart surgery with a keyboard. Now, you just grab it and chuck it. This single feature made computers so easy to use that they stopped being scary office equipment and started appearing in regular living rooms. Microsoft wasn't just a software company anymore. They were a household name. Windows 95. In 1995, Microsoft launched Windows 95, and the world fundamentally shifted. While the logo looked familiar, the experience was entirely new. This was the birth of the Start menu and the taskbar, design elements so intuitive that they remain the backbone of the OS 30 years later. It also introduced plug and play. Before this, installing a printer was a weekend project involving manual driver hunting and dark magic. Now, the computer was supposed to recognize devices instantly. I say supposed to, because in 1995, it was more like plug and pray. This version also bundled Internet Explorer, dragging the masses into the internet era. Unfortunately, the browser was about as stable as a Jenga tower in an earthquake, frequently crashing before you could even finish loading a single page. Anyway, Windows 98. By 1998, we received Windows 98, essentially the refined version of its predecessor. Internet Explorer was finally reliable enough to use without a prayer, and Microsoft moved to solve the chaos of computer hardware. Before the 98 era, every device had its own weird proprietary port. Windows 98 pushed full USB support, giving us a single standard for mice, keyboards, and peripherals, even if it still took 3 tries to plug the cable in the right way. It also introduced dual monitor support, a gift for professionals and the few gamers who actually owned 2 monitors in the 90s. However, stability remained a suggestion. During a live demo on CNN, a Windows 98 machine famously suffered a blue screen of death right in front of Bill Gates.
You plugged in a new device, and it's going to load in the appropriate drivers. You'll notice that this scanner build, whoa.
If the richest man in the world couldn't keep it from crashing on live TV, what hope did the rest of us have? Windows ME. Then came the year 2000, and with it, Windows ME. Officially, it stood for Millennium Edition, but it was quickly rebranded by the public as the Mistake Edition. It is widely considered the worst version of Windows ever released. It was so unstable that simply opening a folder felt like a gamble with your data. Ironically, it did introduce System Restore, a digital time machine that created backups of your system files. The idea was that if a new driver broke your computer, you could just roll back the clock. It was a brilliant concept, but in typical ME fashion, the System Restore tool was often the very thing that caused the crash. It was less of an operating system and more of a digital dumpster fire, and most people couldn't wait to move on. Windows XP. In 2001, Microsoft delivered what many consider to be their masterpiece, Windows XP. This wasn't just a paint job, it was a fundamental architectural shift. By ditching the ancient shaky MS-DOS foundations and moving entirely to the Windows NT system, Microsoft finally created an OS that didn't feel like a digital house of cards. It was fast, stable, and modern, featuring an interface that still influences how Windows looks today. Hardware detection was finally reliable, meaning you could plug in a device without the computer having a nervous breakdown like Windows ME did. It even introduced built-in CD burning, a revolutionary addition at a time when CDs were the undisputed kings of file sharing. XP was so reliable that millions of users would spend the next decade refusing to leave it, much to Microsoft's frustration. Windows Vista. Then came 2007, and with it, Windows Vista, the successor that tried way too hard. On the surface, it was gorgeous. It introduced the Arrow interface, which added translucent glass windows and a 3D switching animation called Arrow Flip. It also brought in User Account Control, or UAC, a security feature designed to stop malware from hijacking your system. Unfortunately, Vista was a classic case of style over substance. Those fancy glass effects were so resource-heavy that they made most mid-range PCs feel like they were running through molasses. And the UAC? It was like having a security guard who asked for your ID every time you blinked. It was so intrusive and laggy that Vista quickly became a cautionary tale about over-engineering a product that nobody asked to be fancy. Windows 7. Microsoft realized they had messed up, so in 2009, they released their formal apology, Windows 7. It is widely regarded as one of the best operating systems ever made because it took the visual DNA of Vista but stripped away the performance-killing bloat. It was lean, it was fast, and it actually worked. It introduced a revamped search bar that could instantly find apps and files, saving users from the endless clicking of the past. It also gave us Snap, a brilliant multitasking feature that lets you drag windows to the side of the screen to automatically resize them. By taking the good parts of Vista and fixing the bad, Windows 7 became a global standard, eventually becoming the most used operating system in the world for years. Windows 8. Launched in 2012, Windows 8 became one of Microsoft's most infamous misfires. But unlike the Millennium Edition or Vista, it didn't fail because of bad code. It failed because of a bad idea. Microsoft decided to delete the iconic Start menu and replace it with a full-screen grid of live tiles. It was a layout designed for tablets and touchscreens, which would have been great if everyone wasn't still using laptops and desktops with a mouse and keyboard. Navigating your PC suddenly felt like trying to use a giant smartphone with a trackpad. Scrolling horizontally just to find your files was peak awkward. The backlash was so intense that Microsoft had to retreat just a year later, with Windows 8.1 awkwardly handing us back the Start button as a peace offering to stop the shouting. Windows 10. In 2015, we got Windows 10. At the launch, Microsoft made the bold claim that this would be the last version of Windows ever, a promise that aged like milk, considering support for it officially ends in October 2025. Visually, it was a great compromise, blending the classic reliability of Windows 7 with the modern aesthetics of Windows 8. It introduced productivity power tools like virtual desktops and task view, finally allowing users to organize their chaos into separate workspaces. However, Windows 10 brought its own unique brand of torture, the forced update. It became a legendary meme for a reason. There was nothing quite like being in the middle of an important project, only for your computer to suddenly decide that now was the perfect time to restart and get stuck at 99% for 3 hours. Windows 11 arrived in 2021 to replace its final predecessor. On the surface, not much had changed beyond moving the Start menu to the center, because apparently shifting an icon 3 inches to the right qualifies as innovation. It did, however, introduce some genuine quality of life upgrades like snap layouts, which makes multitasking for research or presentations much smoother. We also finally got tabs in File Explorer, allowing us to manage files without opening 20 different windows. But honestly, there isn't much revolutionary about Windows 11. In fact, as of late 2024, Windows 10 was still the most used version in the world. It turns out most people don't want new, they just want something that works. So, there you have it. 40 years of Microsoft trying to decide where the Start button belongs. But I want to hear from you. Which version of Windows was your favorite? And which one made you want to throw your monitor out the window? Drop a comment below